How can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Better yet, what if we could remove greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere? Let me present to you wetlands, specifically marshes. Marshes excel at sequestering atmospheric CO2 in their plants and soils. Marsh restoration aims to create new marshes out of old agricultural land with the goal of sequestering CO2 and combating climate change. However, while marshes excel at sequestering CO2, they can also emit methane. Methane is the second most powerful greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide. And while we know that natural marshes can sequester more carbon in the form of CO2 than they emit as methane, restored marshes are largely understudied. My project looks at restored marsh methane emissions from marshes located in southern Ontario. I want to know how much methane are they emitting and why some of them are emitting more than others. To do this, I have a three-step strategy. The first step is to quantify the methane emissions. I do this by deploying floating gas chambers onto the marshes, which allows me to calculate methane emissions from them. The second step is to characterize the marshes. To do this, we measure things like water temperature, water depth, and organic matter content in soils. There's a varying amount of characteristics in these southern Ontario restored marshes. For example, one location might be deep, lush green with grasses and trees, while another might be more shallow with black mud and dead leaves. As you can imagine, these varying characteristics can have a big impact on their methane emissions. The third step of the strategy is to understand how these characteristics can interact with each other. So for example, during the summer, as it gets drier and hotter, we can expect water depth to decrease, right? But when I'm looking at the impacts of water depth on methane emissions, I need to know, am I directly looking at how water depth is affecting methane, or am I indirectly looking at the effects of water temperature? So now you're probably wondering, can marsh restoration be used to combat climate change? So far, I've completed 2 of the 3 steps of my strategy to answer this, but so far my answer would be yes and no. The methane emissions from the southern Ontario restored marshes is incredibly variable, from well below to magnitudes above what we expect to see in natural marshes. We can see that water depth and the organic matter content in soils can influence these methane emissions, but as I've explained and we all know now, we need to understand how these characteristics interact with each other to see how they actually affect the methane. So all in all, marsh restoration does aim to combat climate change, but until we understand the controls on their methane emissions, we cannot assume they'll make good nature-based climate change solutions. From there, once we do understand these controls, we can inform future marsh restoration projects, and that is when we'll begin to combat climate change. Thank you.